So, why did I use such a sensationalized title, the Schitt Freya Killer? Well, obviously to get more views, but I know for a fact people will be asking me if this Topping Pre90 preamp is better than the similarly priced Schitt Freya Plus. Now, for the longest time, whenever someone asks me to recommend an affordable sub $1,000 preamp, I always say the original first generation Schitt Freya. Now, I've never heard the Freya Plus, so I don't know how it sounds, and therefore have never recommended it. No, newer does not mean better. In this video, I will make a small comparison to the original Freya and not the Freya Plus. If you're looking for a preamp under $1,000, I will recommend either the Topping Pre90 or the original Freya. Oh, there's also the Musical Paradise MP7012 preamp that my audio buddy Mr. Cantor recently bought on the used market. And this super affordable Xiang 728A2 preamp that I recently bought on the used market. Now these two preamp is worth a conversation. And perhaps I will make a video on them in the distant future. Usually I don't review stuff I buy because I give my time to companies that send me stuff. After all, I can only produce 3 to 4 videos a month. So let's talk about the Topping Pre90. This Topping Pre90 will beat the Freya in certain things, and for some, it is definitely a better preamp. However, it's not important what some people or what I think, because what is most important is what you think. Is this the right preamp for you? And let's talk about that today. Now, a big thank you to Apple's Audio Store for sending me this unit. If you plan on purchasing this unit, please check them out. So far, it seems most people who have bought from them are satisfied. No, I am not affiliated with them, so it does not matter how many units they sell, but they will not get this unit back. I will include a link to the store in the description box and first comment. Now, what I have here today is the latest Topping D90SE DAC, the Topping Pre90, and the EXT90. I'll call it X90. So let me focus on the Topping Pre90 first. This is a solid state preamp. According to Apple's website, it has a plus 16 dB gain, 1 RCA, 1 XLR input and output. It is fully balanced, measures really good, unlike all Topping devices. Costs $600 USD and $250 USD for the Topping EXT expansion unit. That one you can add like 3 extra XLR and 1 RCA to the Topping Pre90 preamp. The cheapness in me love the idea. You only pay for the extra inputs if you need it. So how does the Topping Pre90 sound? I find the Pre90 not neutral and has color because I can tell easily whenever it is in my system without me needing to sit in the sweet spot. Now I've tried it with more than 6 amplifiers ranging from like $500 all the way to $15,000. And it always does the same. For me, when something is not colored, I can only tell the difference when I sit in the sweet spot. Things I would notice are like wider soundstage, better separation, better imaging, and so forth. The overall tonality does not change. With the Pre90, I don't even have to sit in the sweet spot, and I can tell it is in the system. In short, it sharpens up the sound. I'm not sure it tilts up the treble, but I can tell it brings many things more forward. Instruments that plays in the more higher frequencies such as triangle, for example, takes less effort to notice. Vocal has a slightly more forward presentation and bass feels stronger. Some would say it is more transparent. I would say the sharpness brings more airiness in the soundstage. So, and this is what I call the focal of preamps, which is characterized by a very detailed and clean presentation. So if this is important for you, then yeah, you would choose this over the Freya. The difference between the Topping Pre90 is the imaging is more focused, more detailed, and bass is tighter. The noise floor is lower with darker background. The Freya, on the other hand, has that tube airiness. more extended decay. Now this is important because the extended decay is one of the advantages of having tubes. Bass seems bigger, but relative to Topping Pre90, it sounds a bit more veiled, well, relatively speaking. So depending on what you like, the Freya can be either the better or worse preamp. Mark, who I recently talked about in my DAC video, appreciated the Topping Pre90, but prefers the Schitt Freya. While my other audio buddy, Mr. Quad and Mr. DIY, seem to be more impressed with the Topping Pre90. Yeah, let me tell you a story. So I lent it to my audio buddy, Mr. Quad first. He was like, huh? When he first saw it, it is so small and light. I understand. I mean, who can take this preamp seriously? Now, Mr. Quad has tested enough DACs from Asia, and he knows never to underestimate anything coming from Asia these days. Needless to say, he was impressed when he paired it with his Macintosh MAC 6700 amp. He was even more impressed when he learned about the price. So later he brought it over to my other audio buddy, Mr. DIY Place, to test. Now for those of you who don't follow me, Mr. DIY's preamp and power amp has a MSRP of about $25,000 Canadian. Mr. DIY laughed when he first saw the Topping Pre90. Oh, he laughed because it felt like a toy. Now when he put it in his system, he was like, WTF. Compared to his own preamp, which is like half the price of a car, the Topping Pre90 did not embarrass itself. Now keep in mind, Mr. DIY likes systems with a lot of detail, so I guess it is more to his taste. I have to say, my friends who own these systems, like the price of a car, find a lot of fun trying these affordable entry gear from Asia because they're so impressed with the performance versus price. Now for me, as I start using the Pre90 in my system, I realized this Pre90 pairs well with systems that are neutral or dark. Now you can pair it with a bright system, but depending on your taste, it can be too much of a good thing. Now I have these speakers from Creative Sound Solutions, very musical and fantastic for great long listening sessions. Now some people will wish that it is a bit more detailed. Now with the Pre90 and the SMSL A1, that 10 watt class A amp that I recently reviewed, well, you know what, it's a good match. Not only it sounds brighter, it feels more lively. The other night I was listening to the Peachtree DAC and the new Peachtree Gan400. Now my first impression of this combo is that it's neutral and on the smooth side. So I was asking myself, what if I added the Pre90 in between the two? Yep, as expected, there's more detail, there's more kick in the bass, vocal is brought a bit more forward. That is why I say the Pre90 is a colored preamp. For some people, adding the Pre90 to the Peachtree combo makes the presentation livelier. And they would prefer that, while others would prefer the Peachtree without the Pre90. You know what I say? A question of taste. I would say this, I classify the Topping Pre90 as an analytical preamp, where it magnifies a lot of information in the recording. You will probably hear stuff you normally don't pay attention to. Detail is effortless. I know a lot of people love that, and you know that is why speakers like Focal, B&W, and Monitor Audio sells really well. Now the Topping Pre90 will enhance the sound of your system. You will hear your system going like Super Saiyan. I think given its affordable price and generous return policy, if and only if you're serious for looking for a preamp, you should give the Topping Pre90 a try. If you bought the Freya and you're disappointed, this Topping Pre90 might be more for you than the Schitt Freya because the sound characteristic is very, very different. So let's move on to the negatives. You know, I have never given an award on Thomas in stereo. If I can, I would like to give an award to the Topping Pre90 for having the worst remote ever. Oh my God, it is not responsive, and you have to aim it at the preamp like at a certain angle, and you have to be close to it. It's like, what the hell? Yet, you know, they can make a decent remote for the Topping DAC. Next, as I said, the preamp is pushing detail almost to the limit. For some people, this can easily lead to listening fatigue. For others, it is a pleasure. Now, regardless, most of you will be impressed in the first few minutes. But how would you feel after an hour? For me, as I mentioned in the past, past, systems that are very revealing is like eating food with hot sauce. Slightly painful but enjoyable. However, not everyone likes hot sauce, right, with their food. Now, when I pair the Pre90 with the high-end, like $15,000 Lumin amp that has a lot of clarity, that is when I go, yeah, whoa, this is very impressive, but not ideal for a 5-hour listening session, especially with revealing speakers. So let's move on to the Topping D90SE. When Atos asked me if I would review it, I told them I would not make a separate video on it unless it is very different than the original Topping D90. Now, which I have already reviewed before. There's no point for me to repeat myself. If it is similar sounding, right, there's no point to repeat. In short, this D90SE DAC is transparent and detailed, spacious soundstage, and amazing precision. In terms of bass, one of the best in the sub $1,000 DAC I've tested. Interestingly, under the hood, both the D90 and the D90SE DACs are completely different. The original D90 uses the AKM chipset, while the new D90SE uses the ESS DAC chipset. Both DAC uses different power supply, and on the outside they look exactly the same. I like the fact that it looks very similar to the Topping Pre90 and EXT90 because it looks good together. And you know what? They're just missing a power amp now. Now, what surprised me is that despite being a completely different DAC, they sound very, very similar. In fact, I had to go back and forth a few times to hear the differences. Even then, the differences are not really significant. You know what? I actually find the D90, the original one, more natural sounding, while the D90SE is more detailed. This gives me mixed feelings because, sure, I like more detail from the new one, but at the same time, I prefer the mid-range smoothness from the old one. Besides more treble information, the D90SE seems to have better bass control, and that is about it. So I spend most of my time listening to DSD files with this DAC. My DSD files are mostly Chinese music, and they tend to lean more on the analog side, like vinyl, so it sounds really good with the Topping D90SE DAC. Now, when paired with the Topping Pre90, you are really going for maximum clarity and detail. This combo of D90SE DAC and the Pre90 Preamp reminds me of higher end gear. Now let me explain. I noticed with some high end gear, they tend to go for extremes. And when it pairs well with your system, you'll be blown away. But when it does not, you're constantly wanting to upgrade to fix it. Maybe if I can get a better cable, it'll sound amazing. That is why I always say high-end gear is not easy to get it to sound good. This topping combo reminds me of this problem when pairing with amps and speakers. By the way, behind the scene, my friend Mr. Quad has created this Excel file comparing all my DACs, and objectively, when we add up the scores, this DAC actually scored higher than my $4,000 DAC and his $6,000 DAC. So that's why if you're shopping for a DAC and you're going for clarity, detail, and good bass control, the D90SE should be on your shopping list. So let's wrap it up. At one point in my audio journey, I started buying DACs with a volume control. I know it is common now, but it was not like that in the past. I remember being excited about a DAC with a volume control because I thought to myself, I can save money and don't need to buy a preamp anymore. After all, I don't have a turntable, I don't need any input on my DAC. Now, interestingly, as I spend more time with DACs with volume control, I noticed they don't sound as good when plugged directly to the power amp. It always sounded better when there's a preamp between the DAC and power amp. Now, of course, there are exceptions such as my own reference DAC, the Xiang E28. That DAC, you don't need a power amp, preamp to sound good. So for me, in my audio system, I absolutely need a preamp whenever I use separates. Although I tend to favor tube preamps, I have owned some decent solid-state preamps. For example, I have this Bemesta and Class A CP800 preamp. I never owned a sub $1,000 preamp, and I'm so glad Topping introduced this unit because it is fantastic for people who love clarity. I guess some of you are watching my YouTube video because you're searching for something that would elevate your system. With this Topping Pre90, you will hear a significant difference and you will pass any blind test. The Topping Pre90 is a preamp that will change the sound of your system, and whether it improves your system or not will depend on your taste. Once again, if you love detail and bass, this is something you have to try. Alright, with that said, I'll see you next time.
I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been fine. My cause is not defined. When you kiss me